Welcome to Module 2 of Letters to My Daughters. My name is Reverend Camille Henderson Edwards. I am the daughter of Michelle, the granddaughter of Florine, and the great-granddaughter of Mrs. Mary Lane. I also have the distinct pleasure of serving as the Director of Economic Health and Gender Justice for the General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church here in Washington, D.C. I am so elated that you have joined wherever you are joining, at whatever time you are joining. Welcome. As you entered into the virtual room, you should have been prompted to place your prayer request in the chat that we as a community might hold you in prayer and that we might join together before we begin our conversation in a moment of just grounding. So, as we are transitioning from the day, from the productivity or lack thereof of the day, and as we are transitioning from work and running and ministry and life, let us take a moment to pause. Let's take a moment to breathe. And as you continue to place your prayer requests in the chat, I thought it would be fitting to read a poem for our centering moment. This poem was written specifically for Letters to My Daughters by Reverend Diane Corey, who is an elder, a pastor in the Virginia Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. And this poem is entitled Black Wombs. It reads, Black wombs gave birth as enslaved chattel. Big bellies carrying precious cargo, picking cotton from sun up to sundown. Mothers dying while delivering another life to the plantation. The Lord is our refuge and our shelter. Black wombs gave birth when free yet restricted. Big bellies carrying precious cargo, picking cotton from sun up to sundown. Mothers dying while delivering another life to the reconstruction. The Lord is our refuge and our shelter. Black wombs gave birth fighting for civil rights. Big bellies carrying precious cargo, cleaning homes from sun up to sundown. Mothers dying while delivering another life to segregation. Black wombs gave birth living with affirmative action. Big bellies carrying precious cargo, studying, holding 2 jobs, working from sun up to sundown. Mothers dying while delivering another life to insidious racism. The Lord is our refuge and our shelter. Black wombs today give birth without affirmative action, without equitable health care. Big bellies carrying precious cargo, seeking any job, seeking food and shelter, and the pursuit of stability. From sun up to sundown, mothers dying while delivering another life to systemic racism. The Lord is our refuge and our shelter. Amen. For Module 2 of Letters to My Daughters, we will be exploring the topic of fighting for care in the pursuit of mothering. In the email you should have received prior to this session, you will see that we are focusing on 2 texts. First, through the sacred text from the Bible, we are looking at 2 Samuel chapter 21, verses 1 through 14. My team and I also used piece of literature to pair to our reading of the sacred text. So we looked at Dr. Stephanie Buchanan Crowder's work. She wrote a book called When Mama Speaks, the Bible and Motherhood from a Womanist Perspective. And so we used her literature as a starting point for us to consider what this intersection might look like. And so we talk more about 2 Samuel and then also our reading of Dr. Crowder's work in the podcast. Make sure that you are signed up for the Letters to My Daughter's weekly devotional podcast. If you follow the link either through the email or on our webpage, you can sign up on Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcast. And if you subscribe, you will automatically get a notification once a new episode is uploaded. New episodes are uploaded each week. And the purpose of the podcast is to, one, ensure that you have continued conversation around these topics throughout the course of the month. And then two, I really thought it be important for us to begin to develop spiritual practices at this intersection of faith and advocacy. So prayerfully, you are engaging with the podcast and it is proving to be beneficial for you. So make sure, if you have not already done so, to sign up for the weekly devotional podcast. Before today, we, for the virtual session, are joined by Bishop Robin Dease. Bishop Dease is the Episcopal leader for the North Georgia Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. She is also the first Black woman to do so. I am honored to have her as my bishop. I'm a member of the North Georgia Annual Conference. Today, we are joining her in conversation to talk about her own experience with uterine fibroids. I wanted to make sure that we included conversation about fibroids in this broader conversation around Black maternal health because uterine fibroids, especially among Black women, are extremely, extremely prevalent. I was reading an article by the Century Foundation entitled, "New Fibroids Policy Must Be Part of the Black Maternal Health Agenda." The article shares that due to medical bias and institutionalized racism, uterine fibroids treatments have often resulted in negative maternal health outcomes, including increased rates of surgery-related mortality and increased rates of hysterectomies. I think step one when talking about advocacy is to talk about it. And that's what we do today. So I'm really excited. I'm excited for the conversation. I'm excited for you all to engage with Bishop Dease. And I am just really grateful. This is the first time that Bishop Dease is sharing in public format of her experience with uterine fibroids. And so I'm just really grateful for just her willingness to be vulnerable. I'm grateful for her style of authenticity. But we are entering into that conversation. I do also want to give a trigger warning. We are talking about fibroids. We are also talking about infertility, pregnancy loss, and the inability to have children. So I do hope that you are able to care for yourself in the ways that you need. I also hope that this conversation will shed light on some of the experiences that women are going through on a very real level. So without further ado, here is our conversation with Bishop Robin Dease. All right. Well, hello, Bishop. I just wanted to say first, thank you. I really wanted to say thank you for just taking the time out to gather. There are people gathered in the virtual space for Letters to My Daughters each month. And so on behalf of them as well, I wanted to extend my gratitude. And I thought that we could begin this conversation first by you introducing yourself. So, for the pattern of letters to my daughters, we are stemming from womanist practices. So, we are inviting the women who have come before us, the women that we bring to our work and to our ministry on a daily basis into the space. So, if we could, I'd like for us to begin by you introducing yourself in all of your Episcopal titles and formalities. And also, if you would share with us the women that you come from and how they have informed the woman who is before us today.
Sure, sure. Bishop Robin Dease and proudly serving the North Georgia Annual Conference here in the Southeast jurisdiction. Uh, but I first introduced myself, one, as uh, my mother's daughter, as well as all of the other mothers who have reared me. I am Robin, the daughter of Clara, the goddaughter of Odette, uh, the student of Ruby and Peggy and Shirley and Gwendolyn and Marilyn and Eartha and Etta and Manila and Marilyn and Mary and Neen and Deborah. These are women in many regards who sort of helped me to sort of discern a call, discern a life trajectory, if you will, who saw gifts and skill sets in me that I didn't see in myself. These are persons who had a hand on my life from early childhood up to the present day. Many of them have joined the other ancestors in the church triumphant. And I am just grateful for the ways in which each of these persons individually poured into me, shaped me into the woman I am today, and I'm grateful.
Mhm. Thank you. And we honor the women, we honor the role, the the cloud
Yes,
of witnesses that are here with us
yes.
today. Thank you for that.
Mm.
And I'm curious, in this work, I often reflect on how even my own understanding of just our commitment to community. I often share like that first began with me at my grandmother's kitchen table. Like she had her door was always open.
Yes.
Anyone would come and sit,
Mm.
they needed food, a meal, she was that person in the community who people flocked to, and she
Yes.
always, um, worked to provide, what it was that they needed, whether that was a meal, whether that was prayer, whether that was
Yes.
connecting, um, you know, other people to resources that she didn't have. And so I feel like that is how I first began to sort of like develop my own activist self. And
Mhm.
I'm curious if you had a similar experience of the women that you have named. Had you observed anything about your commitment to justice, to advocacy, to the community? What had you observed over the years in terms of how we are to show
Mm.
up for our neighbor?
That's a good question, Camille. I think one of the ways that these women modeled advocacy or social justice for me is many of them, like myself, were professional women who didn't have children of their own,
Mhm.
professional women who were in a life or a career of service or teaching. Many of them were educators. Many of them were, community advocates and those who, sort of were behind the scenes in many of these organizations. They were sort of the administrative assistant or the secretary but yet they carried a lot of power, a lot of weight in the community. For instance, NAACP, and working alongside. a man who was the director, who was the leader, but yet they were behind the scenes making the meetings happen. They were behind the scenes getting the agendas ready. They were behind the scenes organizing for picketing or protesting. So, and yet in their organizing, they were doing that, as you said earlier, in their communities, on their front porch, in the back porch, peeling butter beans, if you will. Um,
Mhm.
and so, and one of the things that didn't happen in my growing up in New York City, was that my mother refused to let us be in grown folks' business.
Mhm.
So whenever women
Same.
gathered at my mother's house, whether they were her sisters or church women or whatever, she made sure that we went outside to play.
Uh-huh.
And so, but I had the blessing and the honor of, watching my mother lead on the deaconess board in the Baptist church growing up, watching her lead, the missionary society, women who were focused on doing whatever it took to make sure that mission and ministry was happening in a Baptist church. So I got to see that. My mother was a cake baker, so I watched her, how she organized for events, how she organized in the church. And so I think, you know, what you see is what you want to be.
Mhm.
And so when you see women who are, non-mothers, if you will, by the biological aspect, but you see how they have reached out and mothered you and others, you see how they gave their life to their calling, whatever that might have been. And so I got to model that. And I also said, I would like to be smart like her, or I'd like to have people around me like her. So
Mhm.
that was an important aspect of my upbringing, is that I was surrounded by a lot of women who, like myself, God did not bless with children, but yet the community, the church, I mean, they had children all around them, and offered their skill sets and their wisdom and their mother nature, if you will, in rearing us and educating us and just sharing with us things about life that we needed to be aware of.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned this pattern of mothering children, whether biologically, spiritually, communally. Um,
Mhm,
and for module 2, right, the topic that we're talking about is fighting for care in the pursuit of mothering. And what I'd really like for us to talk about today is something that I'm finding. Well, I'll speak from my own experience,
mhm,
as well. When we talk about certain factors that affect your ability to have children, um, that affect, we're talking about Black maternal health throughout Letters to My
mhm,
Daughters, right? And so that affect maternal health outcomes. What I feel is not discussed enough is the prevalence of uterine fibroids, specifically within Black women.
mhm,
um, from my own journey, right? It's sort of this thing where you don't really learn about it until you hear either sisters or other women talking
mhm,
about their experiences. And so I do think that there is some um, uh, the sharing of experiences is important, right? That is a means of raising awareness, and just creating safe space, sacred space to feel comfortable to talk about it. And then hopefully we'll have discussion, or hopefully this conversation will be um, helpful in a way to serve as a conversation starter for even faith communities, congregations to perhaps follow suit in providing safe spaces to talk about issues that are affecting maternal health.
mhm,
And so the question, you have shared prior that you have had experiences with uterine fibroids in the past.
mhm.
And if we could start, could you share with us your experience? So, how did you first come to know that you had developed fibroids?
Mm, um, well, it's been over 20 years. I think I was 30. 34-ish,
Mhm.
when I discovered I had fibroids. And part of that was it was just that I had a very heavy menstruation.
Mhm.
As a matter of fact, it was so heavy that it drained my energy. I'm talking about, I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that every month when my cycle came around, here was this heavy bleed that was taking place. And I mean, it was taking place throughout 5 days.
Mhm.
Sometimes it would go longer, 6, 7 days.
Mhm.
And so I didn't quite know what was going on. And then finally, I think I was uh, the next month had rolled around, and of course, it had drained my energy. I'm talking about literally, I couldn't get out of the bed.
Yeah.
Um, not realizing that it was sucking all the blood out of my body, if you will. And so I went to the doctor. The doctor told him what was going on, did an examination, then had to do some x-rays. And finally, I was diagnosed with having fibroid tumors. They were so big. Some of them were the size of a lemon,
Mhm.
and some was as small as a golf ball. And I think at that time there may have been 7 or 8 of them.
Mm.
And so certainly um, uh, once I was diagnosed, I said, well, what causes this? Is this cancerous? No, it's not cancerous. But I was told by the doctor that eating too much red meat
Mm.
caused fibroids. And I'm a red meat lover. I love beef, love
Mhm.
steak.
Mhm.
So eventually, so you got to stop eating so much red meat. And so, of course, I at that time you didn't hear much because you're talking. Gosh, this has been over 20 some odd years ago. You didn't hear a whole lot about fibroid tumors. There was very little information on the website, so I trusted my doctor and said, "Stop eating red meat." And then that first surgery involved an embolization where the uh, the vessels or the source leading to the fibroids would be those vessels would be cut off so that there'd be no more blood getting to the tumors. And so it was called an embolization, I believe. Um, and so I had that first surgery, and of course, each month the bleeding was less. Of course, it was, I was doing fine, at least I thought. And months had passed, and of course, more fibroids had developed. So they just found another blood source and they just developed, because the old ones, the hope was that they would shrink because they were getting no supply of
Mm.
blood.
Mhm.
And so more developed, a few more developed. And at that time, the recommendation was to just remove them from the uterus. And so this was another surgery that I had done maybe a year and a half later. Could be a little longer than that, I think, maybe two or more years. And so that one was where they would go into the uterus, take it out, and take the tumors off of the uterus. And so I had that surgery done. Um, and of course, I had a normal period cycle for another couple of years, and then they came back again. And they came back with a fierceness even after I had stopped eating lots of red meat. So, so they came back and the doctor told me that there was nothing else they could do. They had done the embolization, they had taken the uterus out, taken the tumors off, you know, put the uterus back intact. But this time it would have to be a full hysterectomy because they had just doubled in size, they had gotten bigger. And then I had was becoming very anemic.
Mm.
So I had to go, so I had a full hysterectomy, and part of my cervix removed
Mhm.
in this surgery. And after that surgery, it was devastating in many regards because I wasn't 40 yet. Um, I had already gone through a breakup of an engagement because my fiance wanted children and couldn't have them after the second surgery. The doctor informed us that even if you got pregnant, you probably would not be able to carry the baby to term because your womb and your uterus are very weak.
Mm.
So because he wanted children, certainly he broke it off and we went our separate ways. And then I found myself having this final surgery, which would mean that I would have to go back and forth to the doctor for these iron injections, because I remained anemic even after that surgery for a long time. And I was taking these iron supplements and whatnot to build up my energy and my iron because of what had taken place over the course of these months and years as it related to my blood, as it related to my energy, as well as the surgeries that I had. So,
The process and the journey. The question that I have is, what mechanisms of support did you have, if any, during that time? I'm asking because I also know that I'm speaking from experience now, from the 30s to 40s, in addition to having this sort of like health phenomenon happen, right? It's also paralleled with life events, right? When you
mhm,
in the op-ed that you wrote, when I first read that you like an engagement was broken off, right? Because
mhm,
your ability or inability to carry a child to term. I was like, wait a time out, because things that we cannot control, things that we ourselves are trying to work ourselves through, all of this is layered on top of life happening. And even for us as, women, where in our like the way that we relate to others, such that um yeah, like in your 30s, you are sort of just like, you are fully adult, like, and,
mhm.
and people relate to you in that way,
Yes.
And so it's almost as if you have to develop like your own mechanism of support.
And I was a
Um,
pastor too, so,
and the past, so let's talk about that, of like women in ministry, right? And we're trying to hold up the church. Women there are just things going on that seemingly we experience by ourselves, and it can be very isolating. And
right.
so I'm curious to know, right, like what did your interior life look like? Who were your mechanisms of support, and how did you make it from day to
Mm.
day?
Well, interestingly enough, I mean, I had some wonderful support and I had some support that I didn't ask for
Hmm.
or seek out.
Hmm.
And then I had some support that I wish I didn't have.
Uh-huh.
Um, at that time, I had women in the church who were very supportive because, one, they had to get me back and forth to the doctor. They had to get me, to my surgery. So it was the women in the local church at the time that were very supportive. There was some saying, "Oh, that the reason you have this issue is because you're douching too much. You shouldn't be douching." That was one lady.
Hmm.
Another one said, well, I had that problem and I took this remedy,
Uh,
So these were older ladies and they would give you their old wives' tales. There were some who believed in voodoo and witchcraft and said, well, some will tell you you're not living right.
because this is in South Carolina right
This
now
is
at
in
the
South
time.
Carolina in
Okay.
the Low Country, Dr. Buzzard's community and generation. And then I had other women who were younger who sort of shared, this happens, or, I had, fibroids, or I had uterine cancer, or, and you'd get the kind of support from women who've been through or had gone through some of the female health issues that women go through.
Yeah.
And so I went from one spectrum to the other. Um, but all in all, most of those women were sharing one because, you know, they also knew other women who were going through um, issues with their female reproductive system over the years. I mean, back in that day, you had women who, performed illegal abortions, in on the sea islands where there was no transportation to get to the mainland. So, they had their own doctors and nurses in those communities for years before they had access to medical and healthcare. Um, and so to hear the plethora of comments or instruction on how to care for yourself, what not to do, it was just the whole gamut. Um, and so, nevertheless, I still saw each of those as an opportunity to
Mhm.
learn what not to do, learn how to pay attention to your body, learn how to ask questions in the doctor's office, learn, you know, how to get more information if you needed it, and not be afraid to ask, you're going to prescribe this medicine. What will it do to me? What will it do for me? What are the side effects of it?
Mhm.
So it was an opportunity, one, to find community with other women who never bore children or never gave children and were willing to open up and share their experiences as well as their support.
Mhm. So throughout your process, right, of being diagnosed with fibroids, going through several different procedures, and then you are in this space where, you are faced with the reality of not being able to bear children. Can you talk about, to the extent that you're comfortable, um, what your thought process was? How did you contend with having this desire to mother,
Mhm.
wanting to bear children, with there's there's grief present, right? Like we
Mhm.
oftentimes only talk about grief in the process of, death of a loved one. But for that, right, there was this element of a desire lost, something lost. Can
Yes.
you talk to us about what was, yeah, going through your mind when you were processing this very present reality of not being able to biologically bear children?
Well, sure. I think there was a host of emotional things going on. First, you have a breakup of, engagement where, you thought this was going to be, your husband for the rest of your life. And you find out that no, I mean, he wanted children more than he wanted me. So
Okay, that part. Okay.
that reality hits you
Uh-huh.
that loving me was not enough,
Mhm, mhm,
and then, and then not only that, it was probably some of the emotion of having to, you know, so what's going on with you and your love life and your fiance and your, you know what I mean? It's sort of the
mhm.
questions
Yeah,
that other people begin to ask that you don't want to share because everybody did know.
yeah.
Um,
Especially in
in
the
my
church, because you were
right.
a pastor, and
Yes,
it
so
is
everybody
very,
did know. It was
yeah, yeah.
it was just a small handful of women who knew who I could trust, who I knew could help out in my recovery and whatever I needed done as it related to, if I needed things done as it related to the church or anything. This was just a small group of women who I trusted and to hold that and to provide the support that I needed. Um, so there was that, dealing with that reality that, And it was also even, I mean, in my mind, going back to scripture and remembering those who, like Hannah and others who wanted to bear children, or, the mother who, has to give up, who's willing to give up her child, in the story of Solomon and the two mothers, two women, everything started just replaying in my mind, sort of, asking myself, so it's really me. I'm really in this place where I will never be able to bear children.
Mm,
Even if I got engaged and married, it's not going to happen. I wanted to see what children from me would look like. And, it was all of those things that now I'll never get to see that. Or will they be like me or not like me? And so all of that was in your mind. And not only that, when I talk about the women, my mother as well, whenever I went home, because you have to understand, I was the only one who didn't have children of my siblings. So, and every time I had to go home, she, when are you going to get married? When are
mm,
you when are you gonna have children? And so, knowing, so she stopped asking, when are you gonna have children? She just kept asking, when are you gonna get married?
mm,
I'm like, so it was just a host of things. What do I say to my siblings? What do I say to my girlfriends? What do I say? You don't, as you're with them and spending time with them and their kids, here you are feeling less than, you
mhm,
know. And so there was a whole lot of that, watching others, even going to the hospital as a pastor, or having to be a chaplain in the hospital and having to be in, neonatal, or having to be in the nursery as a hospital chaplain. All of those things were going on at this time.
mm,
All of those things were happening, um, um, in the midst of me trying to get my head around, you're never going to be or never give birth to a child. You'll never be a mother biologically. You'll never be able to give birth. So it's just a host of things, and you're going from one extreme to the next. As I said, one extreme of saying, this is what God has willed. This is, or did God will it, or was it me eating too much beef, or was it, could
mm,
I have done something else? Could I have just said no to, a full hysterectomy and just dealt with this and tried my best? Could I have done in vitro fertilization? All of those things were going through my mind, and in my spirit, and then I still had to pastor and stand in the pulpit and still preach a word of hope and life, and the love of Jesus, and it was just hard. It was hard. So I retreated. I retreated to myself, and I did a lot of, just removing myself from those voices,
mhm,
from my mother's voice and from being with family in terms of, gathering with them during holidays or celebrations. I really retreated into my own space, my own self, dealing with my own grief and the realization that I was not going to have children, and try to navigate that, without hearing from the outside what I should have done or what I could have done, all of, you just realize that no matter what you've tried, you know, um, it didn't work. And you got to come to that realization and acceptance that there's nothing else you can do. So just dealing with that, just dealing with family, dealing with what that means when I was in those spaces with my family, when I was in those spaces with church members going in the hospital, all of that just brought on so much, um, personal grief, and sadness for me. And it took a while. I think it took a few years for me to get to a place where I was feeling, how do I say, whole again, if you will.
mhm. I'm wanting to know what conversations, to the extent that you recall, that you were having with God. I think and especially I think this is interesting that for pastors, we prepare to have the conversations, right, with congregants when a loved one dies, and we
Mhm,
prepare to have this response to this, question of theodicy, right? Why did
mhm,
that happen to me,
mhm,
right? At this, I have been praying all my life. I'm in my Bible. I'm in the text,
mhm,
and these things are still happening. Um, and so what I am learning, right, is that there is what we prepare for in terms of how we pastor others, but
mhm.
then there's also this very real experience that we go through ourselves, and
Yeah.
I know that, right, from my own experience, us
Mhm,
going through that ourselves, we're made better because of it, because we feel it, we experience it, um, and develop, a new revelation, right, of the divine.
mhm.
And so I'm curious, what conversations were you having with God, and what did your spiritual life look like during that time?
Well, the conversations were sort of, "What is your plan for me?"
Mhm.
You know, "You didn't want me to be a mother," and this is one of the things that I've even shared, with in sermons with congregations as it relates to creation and whatnot. I said there are thousands of couples and women, millions of them across the globe who desire to have children and can't. I mean, there are married couples who are intimate and have intercourse
Mhm.
with the hopes of having children and can't.
Yep.
And so I'm saying, which tells me that every single child that is born is the creation of God, and that and for persons like myself who can't have children, it's sort of maybe God is telling me that, I would have been a bad mother. Who knows? I would
Yeah.
have neglected my children because of my work. I've tried to discern, if this is how things are gonna be in my life, I just need signs to know. And I always ask for signs or, to hear God's voice in this. Questions I would ask, do would I have even been happy having children? Would have gone through, postpartum depression, or, could the baby have been born sick, or all of those things that could have, maybe this is why. Is this the reason why, God? And so those are kind of some of the questions, and you know, or maybe it was just, um, uh, Mother Nature, you know, um, saying to me and, sharing that, there is other work and other care that I need to give to others. That had, if having my own children, I would probably not give that time and commitment to. So it was a host of questions, Camille. It wasn't health questions. It was, those personal questions. Would we had stayed married? Would the children have caused us a whole lot of grief and agony? You never know. And those were the kinds of questions that I was asking God. And then I was also saying, since it is not your will that I would be able to bear children, then direct me and show me what is your will for my life going forward. Um,
Mm.
just send signs and send, voices and persons in my life who will share with me where God is leading me. And then, of course, a year later, I come to find out my brother is dying. He calls me and he says, I need you to raise my kids. I need you to raise my kids because I don't know how long I have to live. And we go to court and I inherit a 13 and an 8-year old
Yeah.
uh, that I get to care for. In my first appointment in my 30s. And it's just how things have moved, and they needed me just as much as I needed them, you know? Um, so some of those questions were, you know, questions of what did you do wrong, blaming yourself, then of course saying, God, why me, and why would you do this to me? You know, I think I've got what it takes, and I think I have enough love in my heart to give, but you're not allowing me to do that. And, and bearing my own children and being married to someone, you know, and so I was dealing with all kinds of emotions as related to God, and then asking God to show me what is your will for my life going forward. And, God showed up in those strange ways. And I got to a place where, okay, I understand. You did not give me children because I would have been an awful mother.
No.
The reason I say that is because I didn't know how to care for a sick child. So when they say, Auntie, my stomach hurts, I'm loading them up with all kinds of drugs that send
Uh,
them to the emergency room. So,
uh,
so, you know, caring for a cold, and you should be caring for a cold when you're trying to care for a flu and making them sicker.
uh. Listen, a journey, we learned it on the job, okay? On the job.
I'm telling you, and I was like, "Ooh, this is a lot." So,
But also to that end, right? Because I want to make sure that we close the circle, right? That this is a reality for many women. For this season of Letters to My Daughters, right? We're focusing on maternal health and the prevalence of Black women, and as much as it is a reality for many women of going through hardship in this way,
mhm,
um, it is also a reality to come out on the other side
yeah,
of that. And as you said before, of attaining a sense of wholeness even
yes,
after really difficult things. And
mhm,
so what I you have made mention of it before, but I just want to ask
mhm.
in to expound and to paint the picture, right? What did that sense of wholeness look like for you? Um uh yeah, just what did that look like for you?
Mm. Well, I mean, now it's yeah, one of the things that I said after this event, and then of course, certainly I had other colleagues who went through some of the exact um, reproductive issues that I went through. Maybe not fibroid tumors, but other issues where they had to have surgical procedures where they would not be able to bear children. And one of the things, and I have some college classmates, sorority sisters, who also never had the opportunity to bear children. And one of the things out of realizing that I'm not the only one, if you will, was realizing um, how do we express, and how do we celebrate, and how do we acknowledge that we still can have a sense of wholeness
Mhm.
even in barrenness. you know
Mhm.
and wanting them to share their experiences. And I have over the years said, I would like to put a book together and share our experiences in a book, because there's some other woman, there's some other person who has gone through what I've gone through, or through what you've gone through, that would need that sense of hope. And part of that work, and being able to talk about it with others and get others to talk about it in a way that is not shaming, in a way that is not you're not a whole person, or you are other
Yeah.
because you have not born children, and every last one of them are being mothers to other children in their own ways. And so how do we collectively bring our voices together, share our experiences where it heals us and frees us in some ways? And so for me, that's using my body as a means of empowering others, being authentically myself, sharing with you as I am now, where I haven't shared openly like this in any space or platform, but sharing with you exactly what I went through many years ago. And I find that as being authentically me, as empowering me, as well as empowering other women, not only to acknowledge what has happened, or women who may be going through this, or um, need to make sure that they pay attention to their body and they get the medical help and assistance that they need in the midst of a healthcare system that is always changing and is always struggling to do what it needs to do for women's reproductive health.
Mhm. Um, Thank you for sharing. I know vulnerability and sharing authentically of an experience of any kind takes a lot. And so I just wanted to say thank you and to honor that. Before we go, it's called Letters to My Daughters. So I invited different women to write in whether they had their own personal experience with maternal health or things that they've observed. And so for this second month, um, we have a woman, Reverend Diane Corey. She is an elder in full connection. She's a lead pastor at St. Mark's United Methodist Church, which is in the Virginia Annual Conference. And she wrote in this letter. It says, "My beautiful Black daughters, sisters, aunties, mothers, grand and great grandmothers.
Hmm.
Wisdom comes with listening. Wisdom comes with experience. Wisdom comes with resilience. As most of you know, maternal health for Black women has been an issue of negligence since the first female slaves stepped onto the shores of this country. Their health nor their maternal health were a concern. Throughout the last 400 years, Black maternal health has been an ongoing crisis. Today, women, even young, healthy mothers, are dying while giving birth or shortly after due to the racist mindset of the healthcare industry. When we state our health problems to white nurses and white doctors, there is a tendency to dismiss or minimize our concerns. When we arrive at the medical facility in excruciating pain, we are regularly denied further assistance until our drug use or abuse history has first been determined. Personally, I have not had to struggle with securing my maternal health, giving birth to 3 healthy children. However, as an outreach worker and advocate in the mid 90s, I witnessed the cruel negligence and bias against young Black pregnant mothers.
Mm.
These mothers did not have access to prenatal care. They lacked maternity vitamins and medical checkups. They were uninformed about proper nutrition. The organization I worked for established the Prenatal Care Warm Line, advocating for and connecting Black women to maternal health resources. My work in collaborating with Boston's allied health and social service agencies to establish governance to reduce infant mortality while providing maternal care for Black mothers. Our advocacy effort established policy via the infant mortality omnibus state bill, which prioritized mental health for Black women. This work resulted in the landmark creation of the Boston Healthy Start Initiative. As a Black woman, our work is never done. We must keep praying. We must continue to work together and keep fighting for Black maternal health. As Black women, we have historically and culturally carried the torch for being strong, resilient, and determined, even when we did not choose or wish to carry this torch. My beloved sisters, let us heed the words of Harriet Tubman. And I prayed to God to make me strong and able to fight. And that's what I've always prayed for ever since. and that was submitted by Reverend Diane Corey.
Mm,
So I
mhm.
would like us to close out. Are there any immediate reflections that came to mind for you? I think the line that stood out for me was this notion of Black women having to carry this torch for which they did not ask.
Mhm.
And not just in this, realm of maternal health, but in so many other fields as
Yes,
well.
yes.
Um, so yes, I'm curious to know what came up for you.
Well, the first thing that stood out in her writing was our womanist ways. That, you know, we are called, we are not only called, we're expected to carry so much. Um, we're expected to carry the remedy for everything, the hope for everything in our communities and societies, the answer for everything. And I think, that's our identity. That is the expectation of others. And my hope and prayer is that, you know, what maternal health, what we see happening among women of color, among African American women as it relates to the need for good maternal health, is that I hope that what comes out of this work are even more informed African American women, um, more of the mothering, the auntie, you know, um, the love that we have for one another um, empowers us to talk about these things in our communities, in our churches, in the places and spaces we find ourselves where we have other women of color who do not have that leadership or that model in their lives or in their communities. I hope that this conversation we're having, Camille, will be helpful for women and young women. At that time, I was a young woman, you know. And so I just hope that even this conversation permeates those areas where this needs to be heard, where we can care for one another in ways that by sharing our experiences compels them to want to be advocates and want to take notice of what's happening and what's going on in our communities. So I appreciate the writing, and that's, certainly I think it needs to be shared so that other women can read that, share that, recite it, hang it up. you know the more that we know, I think the more information we can give people, I think the better. Um, we do better when we know better. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. Bishop Deese, thank you so much for spending time with us, for just your perspective, your experience, for you showing up in the fullness of who you are. It is also my prayer that we're able to, the impetus behind having these conversations is not just to have them, but so that congregations and faith communities might be able to expand ministries that already exist to better accommodate things that are happening already uh,
Yes.
in our congregations, um, and even outside the church as well. So yes, I just wanted to say thank you. Um, and I'm hopeful for the work and the community that might be developed even after this. So we're going to close out in prayer.
Mm.
I know, uh, I hate doing this on the spot, but would you be open to closing us out in prayer?
Sure, sure. Let us pray. Eternal God, for this time together, we give you thanks for the work of GBCS, for the empowerment of women and people everywhere who believe in ensuring that all lives matter and that medicine and science and technology, oh God, will make us better at the work we do to bring new life into this world, oh God. We just ask that you douse us with wisdom and douse us with courage and douse us with your amazing grace so that we might do justice and walk humbly with you in all ways, in all areas, in all the places that we serve, in all the places where there is need, where there is hurting, and where there needs to be your power and your presence, oh God, we pray. So we thank you for what you are doing, seen and unseen in our world. And we just ask that you continue to give us what we need to be a part of it, oh God. So we are thankful for this time together, and we're thankful for GBCS and all that this organization is doing to bring justice in the world and your kingdom here on earth. Do this for us, we pray, in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. I am eternally grateful for Bishop Robin Dease. I am grateful for Reverend Diane Corey for their witness, for their ministry. I just want to say thank you. I also would like for you all, as I shared before, I had that one professor at the end of every class. She would always make us go around the room and share one word or phrase that we felt we had gleaned from our time together. And so I invite you all to do that now. What is one word, one phrase, one feeling, one emotion that came up during this past session? Place it in the chat so that we can all reflect together. As you do so, I have two things that I'd like to lift up for you all to make sure that you all keep an eye out for. So the first is Letters to My Daughter's devotional podcast. It's a weekly podcast. If you subscribe to Apple Podcasts or to Spotify, you will automatically be notified of a new episode as it is uploaded each week. And the second, you will see in our follow-up email, be sure to look out for the follow-up email, a request for you to submit responses via survey. This is the first iteration of Letters to My Daughters. We want to make sure that as we are convening together, that we are also collecting information, that we are also collecting feedback of your experiences so that we can make the necessary adjustments so that this program is something that is meaningful for you, for your community, for your congregation. So be on the lookout for a follow-up email with a link to submit the survey. We are asking that you submit the survey. It shouldn't be too long. It's not long at all. But we're asking that you submit the survey by no later than September 30th, so at the end of this month. And once you submit the survey, your name will be placed in a random pool, and we will select a few winners to receive hard copies of When Mama Speaks. So Dr. Buchanan Crowder's work, the piece of literature that we are engaging for this week. And not just a copy for you, but if you are in a group or in a ministry group, we'll be sure to send copies for everyone in your group so that you all might be able to explore that together. So be sure to look out for the podcast. Be sure to look out for the email for the survey. And once you submit your information for the survey, your name will be placed in a random pool to receive a hard copy of Dr. Crowder's work. You all, thank you all for your time, and thank you all for your commitment to showing up in this space. And hopefully what was said serves as a frame of awareness or awakening for you in some way. As always, feel free to email me reflections or thoughts or experiences that you've had. My email is chedwards, that's chedwards @umcjustice.org. I'll be sure to put that in the chat as well. And until next time, our next session is the first week in September, October. Until next time, I pray that you are able to go in grace. I pray that you are able to go in peace. God bless.